Okay, kiddos, we are going to learn a new skill today. I know if you look at the board, there's quite a few steps. Try not to be daunted by this. This will be more memory work. You'll need to put effort into memorizing the steps, as in review them more than once. Quite often, actually, at least, I would review them every few days, most likely. But anyway, so we're going to learn a different way of solving a quadratic function, and that is called completing the square. Okay, there are three ways to solve a quadratic. This is the second one. If you recall, the first one that we did was graphing. Okay, the third way is called the quadratic formula, and we will either do that on Friday or maybe next week. We'll see. I'll see if we need to practice more with this on Friday or move on. Okay, so what it is, again, is a way to solve a quadratic equation. And what you do is you are turning a regular trinomial into a perfect square trinomial, which, if you recall, a perfect square trinomial is ax squared plus or minus 2ab x plus c squared. Okay? That's why we learned it in the last unit in factoring, so we can learn how to deal with it now. Okay, so again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a trinomial that is not a perfect square trinomial and make it into one. Okay, so the steps are, it has to be in the form x squared plus bx plus c. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to move your c term over to the right side of the equal sign. Okay, so if you notice, we have x squared minus 14x plus 3 equals negative 10. My current c term is positive 3. The first thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to move it over to make way for my new c term that I'm going to create. Okay, so my final, I've given a form here, not a form, what's the word? A template. And if you notice here, I've got x squared minus 14x, and then I put a blank here for my new c, and a blank here for my new c here as well, because you're going to add it to the other side. Okay, so what I did was I moved it over, and I ended up with, moving it means you have to do the inverse operation, so it's plus 3, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, and I end up with negative 13, because negative 10 minus 3 is negative 13. Okay, now I'm going to go about finding my new b term. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, my new c term. I'm going to take the b term, divide it by 2, and square it. Okay, so I'm going to take, and this is the formula, it's going to be b over 2 squared. Okay, my b term is negative 14, so I'm going to take that, divide it by 2, and square it. So I'm going to take negative 14 divided by 2 squared. That will equal negative 14 divided by 2 is going to be negative 7. Negative 7 squared is going to be positive 49, because if you recall, any number, two negatives multiplied together are positive. So it will be positive 49. That is my new c. So c, I'll put new c. New c is 49. Okay? Now the next step is to add my new c to both sides of the equal sign. Okay, it's going to go in the place right here where the old c was, and I'm also going to add it to this other side, to the right side of the equal sign. So here's what this looks like. Okay, so I'll have x squared minus 14x, and then I'm going to do, my new c is plus 49, right? And then I have equals negative 13, and then I'm going to add it over here to plus 49. Okay. If I simplify that, what I end up with then is x squared minus 14x plus 49 equals 36. Okay. Now, I have just created a perfect square trinomial. X squared minus 14x plus 49. Okay? If I take the square root of this and multiply it by 2, I get my b term. That's how I can tell. So I take 49, the square root of 49 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14, and it's minus here, so it'll be minus 14. That's how I tell it is a perfect square trinomial. Now you're noticing we have a number over here. We're not doing anything with that just yet. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write this in factored form, okay? So if you recall, perfect square trinomial, it will end up being x, because this is a minus sign here, it will be x minus 7 times x minus 7, or how we need to write it is x minus 7 squared, right, because that's times itself, equals 36, okay? That is the factored form. The correct factored form is this right here, okay? Now, I'm going to introduce you to something you've not quite done yet, and that is if we want to get rid of something squared, we take the square root. In this case, we will have to take the square root of both sides. This, like addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, is also an inverse operation. The inverse operation of something squared is the square root, okay? And like with the other inverse operations, what we do to one side of the equation, we have to do to the other. So, let's see here. I'm going to take x minus 7 squared equals 36. And I'm going to take the square root now of both sides because I want to get rid of the exponent. Take the square root of both sides, okay? Now, what I end up with is x minus 7, because taking the square root of something squared just gets rid of both of those, okay? So I'm left with just x minus 7 equals, now this is something a little bit different, plus or minus 6, okay? And you have to always do plus or minus 6. Here's why. Because 36 has actually two answers. So it is either 6 times 6, or it is negative 6 times negative 6, because two negatives multiplied together equal a positive. So therefore, because there are two possible answers, you always put plus or minus, okay? Now, the very last step is to simplify. And by simplify, I mean we are going to create two equations, okay? So we're going to have x minus 7 equals positive 6, and x minus 7 equals negative 6, okay? Now, all I have to do is I have to move the 7 over. So it's x minus 7 here. I'm going to add 7 to both sides, and I end up with x equals 13. And then I'm going to add 7 to both sides here, and I end up with 1, because negative 6 plus 7 is positive 1. So these are my two roots, x equals 13 and x equals positive 1. Okay. Watch this video again. There are quite a few steps. I don't think that it's too terribly complicated. If you have any questions or you just don't understand it after watching it again and taking notes, feel free to contact me tomorrow, or rather today, and I'll be happy to help you with it. Okay guys, you can go ahead and start your assignment now.